Okay. So first of all, you need to specify the level of accuracy, how much accuracy you need from the survey. If you are again going for a large scale survey, then around 10% accuracy or 5 to 8 kilometers per hour accuracy is enough. For operational studies, small scale studies, 2 to 5 kilometer per hour is enough. Now, one thing you can note here that accuracy is not mentioned in terms of time; it is mentioned in terms of speed. Okay, because the main outcome of the travel time survey is the average speed on the segment or the average speed of the network. So that's why accuracy for travel time survey is mentioned in terms of speed. Okay, then you need to identify what circuits meaning network, highways you are going to survey. Okay, if you are doing it in a dense urban area, then 7 to 10 signals uh, is a like uh, optimum size of the network. Okay, 7 to 10 signalized intersections like continuous. Okay, continuous 7 to 10 or a network which contains 7 to 10 signal intersection is considered as optimum size of the network for travel time surveys. If it is too long, then you will see a lot of variation. If it is too short, then it may not fulfill the purpose. What road sections you are going to identify for what road sections you will do the travel time survey. What will be the method of travel data collection? You will use an observer or a GPS or both or one of them or what? Uh, some of my colleagues in University of Hasselt, they have prepared these probe cars. So they have a lot of sensor for everything actually. Time and distance and GPS. Okay, so they don't need an observer. The person is driving. When they complete the survey, they take the data from the sensor. So what method of data collection you are using, depending upon the resources, times and days when you will do the survey, number of runs for each circuit, each network, each series of signals will be surveyed how many times, okay, and for how much time, okay, how many times and at what time, sorry, at what times. Okay, typical values for coefficient of variation meaning uh, the ratio of mean upon standard deviation. Okay, so coefficient of variation for travel time surveys is usually between 9 to 10 for roads. Okay, which have low and high variability. So if you have low variability, then coefficient of variation should be close to 9. If you have high variability, the coefficient of variation will be close to 15 and so on. Okay, if you need, we have used these values earlier as well. Normally, 90% confidence level is taken, 10% error is allowed. Then in that case, 3 to 7 runs will be the optimum size. Okay, so each network with these many with this specification, each road segment should be observed 3 to 7 times. Okay, how they have calculated these values? You go back to the calculation of sample size which we have done in the last lecture. And 5 is considered as an optimum value. 5 is considered as an optimum value. 3 to 7 is the range, okay, preferable range, and 5 is considered as an optimum value. Okay, again, you may be saying I keep on saying whatever we have discussed is this in. Okay, these are basically normal terminology. Normal is we collect cross-sectional data. Normal is we collect revealed preference data. Okay, the normal thing is we collect revealed preference data. Revealed preference means what? Collecting data about something which the traveler is already doing. Collecting data about something which the traveler is already doing. This is revealed preference data. So if I ask you what mode of transport you have taken to go from your house to your work, this is revealed preference. Okay, but if I ask you what will you do if there was a metro service, then whatever answer you give me, that will be called as stated choice data. stated choice. So the difference between revealed preference, stated choice is revealed preference is about something which you are already doing, and stated choice is about something which you would do, hypothetically, an imaginary scenario. Okay. So ideally, revealed preference is the common thing to do. Asking people about what they are already doing is what we should do, but it has some limitations. Limitation is that you are asking about their actual choices, okay, but actual choices for the present, but it does not give you any flexibility for constructing scenarios for future. Whatever he is doing for now, it is under the current circumstances. In future, these circumstances will not exist, and then what he will do, we don't know. Okay, so revealed preference data cannot tell you about something which will happen in future. Observed behavior may be dominated by very few factors, and it may make it impossible to detect the importance of other factors. For example, income may have a very high effect on the mode choice of the people, and then you may not be able to detect the importance of education. Okay, because whenever it goes above this much income level, the choice is car. There may be some other factors which are influencing the choice as well, but it will not become prominent in the revealed preference data. So until I ask the user to think about something new, this thing will not be visible. Okay, currently my income is this much, I go by car, that's it. Okay, so some hidden parameters may not be visible in revealed preference data, potentially hidden, potentially important parameters. And revealed preference data then again has limitation in collecting responses about something which will be entirely new, some new policies. Okay, so for example, if we start a completely new mode of transportation, like a metro service or a new train service, then what will happen, we don't know. Okay, similarly, if you start a road pricing system on the road, what will happen with the choices, we don't know. Okay, so something which has not happened, what people will do in response to that thing is not known with revealed preference data. You have to ask them what will you do. Okay, so because of these choices, we collect stated preference or stated choice data. Now they are using stated choice and stated preference in two different manners. Okay, I will explain to you each one of them. So for wherever data for real markets, real thing is not available, okay, then we go for stated preference data. Okay, some asking about something which is not actually there. Okay, the stated preference method can be of three types: contingent valuation, conjoint analysis, and stated choice techniques. Okay, stated choice is part of a stated preference. Okay, and we will come back to it. What does it mean? First of all, contingent valuation. You ask the people about their willingness to pay if a certain policy is applied or a certain product comes into the market. How much will be they willing to pay for this new product? Okay, for example, the new policy may be reducing the number of accidents. Then you ask them, how much will you be willing to pay to apply this new policy? Okay, so we are asking the choice in terms of money. Okay, and you can ask them by directly questioning them, how much are you willing to pay? Direct questioning. You can play a bidding game with them. Okay, that what will be your last bid? If this policy is applied, how much you are willing to pay? What is your last bid for that? Okay, like you bid in auctions, right? That this guy is willing to pay this much. Are you willing to pay more or less? This is a bidding payment, bidding game. Okay, in terms of comparison, if this guy is willing to pay this much, how much you are willing to pay? This is a bidding game. Okay, then you can have payment options what type of payment you will be willing to go for if this policy is applied, and then you can have referendum choices as well. Referendum basically means yes or no. Referendum means yes or no. So if this policy is applied and this much you have to pay, will you adopt or no? Simple. Okay, referendum means yes and no. Then we have conjoint analysis. Conjoint analysis means you allow the researcher to examine the preferences, okay, and even the willingness to pay is also included. That if this policy is applied, you have to pay this much, okay. And then so you include everything, the characteristics of the people who will be going for this option, and the cost which they have to pay, and the complete choice and the description of the choice. And then in the conjoint analysis, then you ask them to rank the different policy options in terms of preference. Okay, so in conjoint analysis, we are not selecting or rejecting anything. We are just preparing a list of preferred options. Okay, so we have an option for metro, railway, and the present bus. Okay, don't select or reject anything. Just tell me which is the most important option and which is the least important option, and that's it. So in conjoint analysis, we are not asking him to select or reject anything. We are asking him to give us the preference. Okay. And this is the example of a conjoint analysis. So you can see how many? 4 complete scenarios are there. Okay, 4 complete scenarios. In this case, time on the bus will 15 minutes, walk time 10 minutes. In this case, 20 minutes and 8 minutes. In this case, fare is higher, time is less, and 10 minutes walk time. Again, fare is higher, one change, 15 minutes on the bus, walk time to 8 minutes. So we have given the person the complete description of each option, and now he has to rate which scenario is the best for him and which scenario is the worst for him. Okay. And then we have stated choice methods. Okay, stated choice methods. You choose your preferred alternative from a subset of hypothetical alternatives. Okay, so you give him hypothetical alternatives that this can be possible, this is possible, this is possible. Out of these, select one. Select one. Okay. The main difference between revealed preference and stated choice is that in a stated choice, you are asking them what they would do. What they would do if this happens. Okay. The decision may be in a context which is real time. So you ask him, for the trip which you are taking now, you have 3 options, 3 hypothetical options: metro, railway, and BRT or LRT, whatever. Okay, or an aeroplane, whatever. All 3 options are hypothetical, but the scenario is real. He's actually taking this trip presently as well, but I'm just giving him an imaginary or hypothetical choices. So out of these, he will take one. Okay, or the scenario can also be hypothetical. That in future, let's say you have to travel to USA. He's not traveling to USA right now. So you say in future, if you have to travel to USA and if you are given this choice, which one will you take? Okay, so scenario is also hypothetical. Choices are also hypothetical. This is also part of stated choice. A stated choice can be for real scenario or hypothetical scenario. Okay. Yeah, and in a stated choice, you include the present choice as well. Okay, so with the hypothetical choices, present choices also or should also be included. Should also be included. Okay, you can tell him, okay, for your work trip, you have, let's say if you have choice 1, 2, and 3, which one will you choose? Okay, without giving him the option which he is currently choosing. This can be done. Okay, but it is not. It will not give you a valid response because here, for example, if I'm already going by a car, okay, then even if you give me an aeroplane, I may not take the aeroplane because I've already bought the car, the distance is very near, and so on. So if you don't give me my real choice and you just tell me these three hypothetical choices, so obviously I have to select one of them, right? So now you are forcing me to select the hypothetical choice. While in fact, even with these hypothetical choices, I will go for my actual choice right now. Even if you give me 10 other hypothetical alternatives, I will not choose them. I will still select the actual one, the present one. Okay, so it is recommended that with the hypothetical choices, add the existing choices as well. The main features of stated choice are these. So it is based upon the elicitation of the respondent, statements, interpretation, what the respondent will do for a different hypothetical alternative. Okay. Each option should have a complete package, like I showed you. The travel time, the fare, the number of changes he has to make. Give him a complete package. If you just ask him, will you take a metro or a car? How can I decide? I cannot decide. To decide, I must know the fare of the metro, where it will take me, how much will be my waiting time. All these things must be known in order to decide fairly. Okay. So if you just ask me whether we go by metro or car, whatever I decide, it is not fair. It is not accurate. Okay. So whenever you are constructing these hypothetical alternatives, you then you have to take into account the effect of each parameter. Okay, what will be the effect of travel time? So, like I have shown you in this example. So between this and this choice, I am just changing the time. That means between this and between this and this choice, I am just changing the number of interchanges. Okay, so now when you change each parameter at a time in the package, then you can see the effect of each parameter on the choice. Okay, somebody chose this over this. That means all these things have the same effect, but number of interchanges is more important for this guy. Okay, and so on and so forth. Whoever is making these choices, like giving these choices to the traveler, okay, he has to make the alternatives realistic, something which the user can think about. Okay, like I have given you the example of going to USA. Okay, it is not a practical example. The practical example is if you have to go to Saudi Arabia, then you would take this or this. This is more practical. Telling me something which may not happen even in next 50 years doesn't make any sense. Even if I try, I cannot think you. I cannot think about it. Okay, so give me something which can happen, which I can think about, which I can relate to. Okay. Yeah, when you get the responses, using the responses you can know the relative importance of different attributes, like I showed you in the previous case. You can see between two alternatives the only difference is fare. So one person has taken lesser fare over the other, so that means for that person fare is more important than everything else. Okay, and so on and so forth. So you can see the effect of different alternatives. Okay. In stated preference data, any stated preference data, the experiment or the choices can be labeled or unlabeled. Okay, so labeled means that the name has some importance. Labeled means that the name has some importance. Okay, and unlabeled means the name doesn't have any importance. Okay, for example, you can see the first two tables. The one on the left hand side is labeled. So train, bus, car. We know the meaning of train and bus and car, right? Okay, and unlabeled, you see on the right hand side, route A, route B, route C. So the name doesn't mean anything to me. Okay, this is unlabeled. So if you hide these properties, the attributes, the cost and the toll and all these things, if you hide them, if you just tell me route A, B, and C, I will not know anything about it. This is unlabeled. Okay, labeled means even if you hide everything, I know train has a fare. I know train runs on the track. I know bus and train stations are not in the garage of my house. Okay, and I know the car will be in my house. I know the car, I can drive the car. Okay, so labeled alternatives are those that with the name the user can think about some of the characteristics of the options, like train, bus, and car. Okay, unlabeled means if you hide the attributes, the user will not know what you are talking about. Okay, and then you have labeled with status quo. Status quo means the present option. Okay, the present option. Status quo means the present option. So train and bus, if you only give him train and bus and don't include the car, but he presently using the car, this is without status quo. Like I said, you should not do it. Okay, always include the status quo option. Okay, there are two issues with the stated preference data preparation, the survey preparation. One is what attributes we can use for defining the choice. Okay, what are the things important for the user to define his choice? What are the things he would consider? Okay, should I tell him, for example, the waiting time isn't important for him? Should I tell him the time to go from the house, the distance from the house to the bus stop isn't important for him? Okay, should I tell him the route? Okay, should I tell him whether there will be an internet service in the bus or not? Is it important for him? I don't know. Okay, so to find out which factors are important so that you can make up your choices, this is one challenge or issue with the stated preference survey preparation. The other one is the attribute level. Okay, into how many levels you can divide the attribute, and the distribution can be quantitative or qualitative. For example, you can just tell him that take train, bus, and car. If you go by train, it will take you 10 minutes. If you go by bus, it will take you 8 minutes. If you go by car, it will take you 6 minutes. So you can see every time you are giving me a number. So this is quantitative leveling. Okay, quantitative values of the attribute level. Okay, travel time is the attribute, and I'm defining it in 3 levels, and each time I'm giving you a value. Okay, and qualitative will be if you take a train, it will give you the highest travel time. If you take bus, it will give you intermediate travel time. If you go by car, it will give you low travel time. So I'm not giving you any values, I'm just giving you comparative terms, low, medium, high, and that's it. Okay, so again, going back to this case, so you can see the walk time is divided into 2 levels, 10 minutes, 8 minutes. Time on bus is divided into again 2 levels, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. Number of interchanges again divided into 2 levels, no change, 1 change. Okay, so my choices should be distributed into how many levels for each attribute. Okay, again, fare, you can see 2 choices, 70 pence and 85 pence. Okay, somebody else may introduce a third choice here as well for the fare. You may say, let's say 80 pence. Okay, so then fare is divided into 3 attributes, 3 levels, sorry, not 3 attributes, 3 levels. So I have total here 4 attributes, and each attribute is divided into 2 levels. Okay, interchange is and all of them are quantitative. For all of them I have 2 distinct values. It's not like a high, medium, and low. Okay, so this is what we mean attribute levels of attributes. Okay, so the survey process starts with clarifying the study objectives, why you are doing the study. Okay, and what are you trying to achieve out of it. Define experimental conditions, area, time, people, population of study, for what population you are doing the survey, study objects, the alternatives, and the attribute level for each alternative. Okay, attributes and their levels for each alternative. Assumptions, okay. Confidence level, percentage error, these are all what? Assumptions. Type of model you are expecting from the survey. So in your case, I gave the survey for automated autonomous vehicles. I'm expecting you to make a mode choice model, okay. Utility functions, okay. What type of utility functions you will be calculating out of the survey. Okay, utility means the equation. Utility function means equation, okay. The type of equation you are expecting to come from the data, okay. So you have to define the coding, okay, and any prior estimate you have. Maybe you already have the average income of the area, maybe you have the average number of households in the area, and so on and so forth. So find out these things or define them, assume them, okay. Generate experimental design, number of choice tasks, how many choices you have, and any design constraints you have, okay, that I cannot continue the survey for this long, I cannot do survey online, I cannot do survey with long questionnaire and so on and so forth. And then you construct the design, okay. Construct the design means now you have everything ready. Sample size, population, time, resource, everything is ready. This is what we mean by construct the design, okay, and number of samples you will need to know, and so on. Then conduct post-design generation testing, okay. So you do a pilot study, basically. Stage 4 pilot study, short survey, okay, to know if you made any mistake in the survey, if some people cannot understand the question. Or pilot study can also mean that you collect some and you cross-check with the already existing data, okay. So all these things are for step 4. Then step 5, conduct the questionnaire, okay. Make sure the choices are randomized, okay. You are not providing them choice according to preference or any biasness, okay. And randomize everything, basically. Randomize everything, okay. So don't don't give them according to a specific order or something. Okay, so attributes and alternatives, the main thing about a stated preference or stated choice, okay. So the range of options is according to the objective of the study, okay. So how many options you want to give, it will depend upon the objective of the study, okay. You want to do a study about public transport, it will include the options for public transport, but do not omit choices which are already existing or which are practical for the user, okay. So for example, you just want to ask him for 3 or 4 alternatives, but currently there are already 5 alternatives the user may consider. So 5 plus 4 total will be 9, okay. Don't omit the already existing and realistic choices, okay. The set and nature of attributes should also be realistic. So if you say there will be a bus service which will take a metro service, let's say metro service which will take only 50 fills from you, this is unrealistic, okay. Metro service cannot operate with a fare of 50 fills, it's too low, it will go bankrupt by second week, okay. So make attributes which are realistic. Travel time, walking time, something which the user can understand, it is practical, okay. Not too high, not too low. Right attributes are included, the choice of attributes, okay, what are important for the user, okay, and they are described in an easy to understand manner. The user can easily understand it. For example, if you say, like I showed you the example, that walking, the distance from the house to the bus was given in terms of time, because this is easy to understand. If you give me in terms of distance, then everybody may have its own interpretation. So if you tell me distance from the house to the bus stop is 500 meters, I may consider it a walk of 2 minutes. Somebody who is old may consider it a walk of 10 minutes, okay. So you may have different responses for the same choice depending upon the perception of the user. So they give them attributes in terms which they can understand, okay, which they can easily understand, okay. The selection of the metric, something, the units, okay. So time can be easily measured, okay. So in the first point they are saying select attributes which the user knows about. So I know about waiting time, I know about walking time, I know about travel time, I know about fare. But if you tell me the bus will consume this many liters of the petrol, it doesn't make any sense to me, okay. Or the tires of the bus will be changed after every 2 years, it's not my concern, okay. So this is point C, and point D is that whatever attributes you are giving, it are in the units which are straightforward for me, okay. So I know time, but if you tell me something in density, then I don't know anything about it. Some of the users may not understand what you are saying. Density, volume, okay. Everybody understands time and cost, right? And the number of changes. So give them units which are easy to understand. Okay, and finally, number of levels for an attribute must be defined. Okay, variables which have more levels, variables which have more variation from one choice to the other. For example, fare. So if you give me more options for fare, they will be considered more important by the respondent as compared to other parameters. So I have 5 different options of fare, and travel time has only 2 options. So I would perceive that fare is more important than travel time. Okay, so make sure that you do not force the user to think about something which is not true. Okay, so if fare is less important according to you, don't make unnecessary levels in it. Okay, imposing attribute level balance, and this happens when attribute level appears equal number of times. Okay. So you have, for example, fare and travel time. Okay. So you have, for example, 2 options for fare. Okay. And within each option, you have 2 options for travel time. This is what we call as attribute level balance. Okay, you have 2 options of fare, and within each option you have the 2 or 3 levels of travel time. Okay, and each attribute level appears equal number of times. So for each value of fare, you have taken equal number of observations. Okay, so I have 3 observations for fare of 200 fares, and I have 3 observations for fare of 500 fares, equal number. This is attribute balance, attribute level balance. Okay, so for each level of the attribute, I have same number of observations. Okay, so if you have 4 attributes, for example, 2 of them have 2 levels, so they have 2 possible values, and one has 3 levels and the one has 4 levels. Okay, so for example, I have, let me give you some options here. Okay, so let's say 4 attributes. So 4 attribute is time, cost, speed, and comfort. Okay, so I give you 3 possible values of time. Okay, or let's say 2 or 3. Okay, 3 possible values of time, 4 possible values of cost. Okay, 2 possible values of speed, high and low, and 2 possible values of comfort level, which is again high and low. Okay, so to have an attribute level balance, how many observations you should collect? These many. Okay, 2 attributes with 2 levels, so 2 square. 1 attribute with 3 levels, so 3 to the power 1, and one attribute with 4 levels, so 4 to the power 1. This is known as factorial design. Okay, when you impose attribute level balance and then you try to find out how many observations you need, this is what we call as factorial design. And this is again something which is common even if you are creating an experimental design for material testing. Even if you are doing a material design testing, you will follow factorial design to make sure you have equal number of repetitions for each type of material. Factorial design, and this is how you calculate it. Okay, so the number of levels will be the what you call the digit itself, and the power will be the number of attributes with that level. So 2 attributes with 2 levels, so 2 to the power 2. 1 attribute with 3 levels, so 3 to the power 1, and so on. Okay, so total number of observations you should collect is 48. Okay, 48, and this will cover all effects: the effect of time, the effect of cost, the effect of speed, the effect of comfort. Let me call it CO. Okay, so effect of everything is covered. Okay, and their effect on each other will also be covered. If you take 48 samples with equal number of observations for each thing, then you are covering the effect of each variable independently and each variable as an interaction, like combined effect of time and cost, combined effect of time and speed, and so on. This everything will be covered. Okay, so the effect of each variable individual, we call it main effect. Okay, and the combined effect is known as interaction effect. Okay, so we have a main effect and we have an interaction effect. Okay, if you go for a smaller design, so you don't want to go for a full factorial design, you want to go for a smaller design, then you would make sure that with each combination, you know, you have you know, so 2 into, sorry, then if you go for a smaller design, it will be you know, 12, you would only require 12 samples. If you go for a smaller design, okay, and you want to just take the effect of main effects, just the effect of each variable, individual variable without the interaction, then you have to take 12, at least 12 samples. Okay, how is that? So you need, so you have you know, the choices which you are giving. Okay, so you have, for example, 4 choices for cost, and within those 4 choices, one of them is with one value of travel time, the other one is with another value of travel time, the other value is another value of travel time. Okay, so you take one effect, okay, and then the other effects are already covered. Okay, so basically you just make sure that you have at least one observation for each one of them. Okay, without their combination, so you may have, for example, one observation for each values of cost. Okay, then you have one observation for each value of time, but one of them, let's say, is missing. Okay, or for speed, one observation is missing. You only have observation for one level of speed, or you only have one observation for one value of comfort. Okay, so if you go for that design, that I want to focus on one particular parameter, and for that parameter I will have equal number of observations, then you should have at least 12 samples, because 12 is the number which is equally divisible with 2, 3, and 4. So whatever parameter you take, if you take equal number of observations in them, then you will at least have 12 samples. Okay. Okay, this is the end of this topic. If you have any questions, please go ahead. Otherwise, I will go for the next topic. Any questions? Okay. The next topic is something which we have covered. Okay, so fortunately we have it in the end, so we can go through it quickly. So we covered it in more detail when we were doing the advanced traffic engineering course. Which is travel. The topic is travel demand forecasting, and we did it from a different book in the advanced traffic engineering course. So now I have selected it from a different book. Which is Traffic and Highway Engineering 4th edition by Garber and Hoyle, available online with the solution manual. For this book, the book and solution manual both are available online. Okay, so we will cover travel demand forecasting from this book. So demand forecasting can be divided into two approaches: urban travel demand and intercity travel demand. Okay, urban travel demand and intercity travel demand. For urban travel demand forecasting or modeling, we need databases which can be prepared using household interview service or roadside interview service. So this topic will cover many of the things which we have already discussed in the previous topics. Okay, so we have talked about home interview service and roadside interview service and so on. Okay, in urban travel demand database, the things which can be included are characteristics of the trip maker, the traveler, and these characteristics include age, sex, income, ownership, car ownership, and so on. It may also include the type of land use at the end of the trip. So from what type of land use he started the trip and in what type of area he ended the trip. Okay, and the mode of travel. So these things are usually included in the urban travel demand model database. Okay, and then you can aggregate, meaning combine, or sum up the data for each zone or for each household as well. Okay, so the data can be kept or can be summarized for each zone, or you can keep it at a disaggregate level for each household and individual. Usually the data is collected at individual level, and then you can combine it for the household or for the zone. So for example, you collected data from 10 individuals living in the same household. So disaggregate meaning data of each individual is one value. Aggregate means combine all of them and give me total number of trips for that household. This will be aggregated. Similarly, if you want to aggregate for the entire zone, then you have the data for all the households in the area. You combine all of them and you give me the combined value for the entire zone. Okay, this is aggregated. Then for intercity travel demand model, the data is usually aggregated. Okay, and it is like comparatively more aggregated than urban travel demand. Urban travel demand database is usually starts with in a disaggregated form for each individual, but intercity travel demand is usually has an aggregated data. For example, population of one city and the population of the other city, total, average income of one city, average income of the other city, travel time of the entire highway for everybody, average travel time for everybody, average speed for everybody, and so on and so forth, and the cost for everybody. Okay, the total travel cost for everybody. Okay, so the data for intercity travel demand model is aggregated usually. Okay, from the start. From the start, you don't aggregate it afterwards. It is aggregated at the start. There are three types of factors which influence travel demand model: location and intensity of land use, socioeconomic characteristics of people, and the cost and quality and extent of transportation services. So the first thing is land use. We have discussed this so many times. Land use basically is the type of activity which you are going to perform at the end of your trip. So this is the most important determinant of travel demand, the type of activity, the purpose. Okay, so shopping centers and residential complexes, office buildings, their traffic generation patterns will be different from each other. The type of traffic they are generating and the amount of traffic they are generating will be different from each other. Socioeconomic characteristics of people include their values and lifestyles. Okay, mainly their values and lifestyle, their preferences, how they like to travel. Okay, so high income workers, okay, a residential area where you have mostly high income workers, it may generate more car trips as compared to residential area which has retired people in it. Okay, so in USA they have certain areas with old age homes and so on usually, and they have certain areas which are outside the city, and usually retired people live there because they don't have to go to work every day. So those areas have less car trips as compared to areas which have active working people live there. And then the transportation service, the data about the transportation service, which was we talked about supply factors and demand factors. So supply factors are what we are talking about in point number 3: frequency, fare, waiting time, number of lanes on the road, and so on and so forth. All these are what? Supply factors. Okay, so travel time, cost, convenience, comfort, safety, all these are what? Supply factors. So these factors are considered by the traveler when they are choosing their mode, or when they are choosing whether I should travel or not. For example, in the current scenario, COVID, okay, COVID has can affect the supply of the transportation service a lot. Okay, we may go into a phase where buses are not allowed to operate at all because everybody will be for avoiding the gathering of the people in enclosed places. So in that case, bus travel is not possible at all. Okay, so the third factor may influence the choice to make a trip or the choice to take a particular mode for a specific trip, and this includes travel time, cost, convenience, comfort, safety offered by any mode. Okay, so these are the steps which we have covered earlier as well in advanced traffic engineering course. And these steps include, first of all, find out the land use and travel characteristics of the area, general land use and travel characteristics, what type of area it is, what type of vehicles come into this area, what type of people are living there, and so on and so forth. Then you move on to the other 4 steps, which are trip generation, trip distribution, mode choice, and assigning trips to a network. Okay, trip distribution, mode choice, and assigning trips. They are influenced by the service you are providing for transit and highway systems. Okay, the type of service you are providing will influence the last 3 steps. Okay, and we'll talk about each one of them starting from now onwards. Before you start the process, the first step, like I said, land use and travel characteristics. So first of all, divide the area into traffic analysis zones, TAZs. We have discussed this term earlier as well. So smaller zones which you make for doing traffic analysis. Okay, then you can, in the end, once you collect the data, you can combine the data of different zones into one district. Okay, so you can have a bigger area, and that area can be divided into smaller TAZs. Okay, and for each TAZ, then you develop land use estimates. Okay, type of land use and intensity of the land use. Okay, if it is a commercial area, then how many shops you have. If it is an industrial area, how many industrial complexes you have. If it is a residential area, how many housing units you have, what type of housing units you have. So these things. So this is done before you start any traffic data collection. So you start with the second step now. So the first step is collecting data about land use and so on. So start with the second step, which is trip generation data. Okay, or trip generation. So the purpose of the process of finding out number of trips that will begin or end in each zone, in each TAZ. This is what we call as trip generation. Okay, the process of finding out the number of trips which are starting or ending in each zone is known as trip generation. So the outcomes of trip generation are two. First one is to develop a relationship between trip end production and land use. Okay, what is the effect of land use on production of trips? Okay, now trip end basically means one end of the trip. Okay, you can see the term here, trip end. Trip end basically means one end of the trip. So either the trip is starting from there or ending at there. Okay, so what is the relationship of trips which are starting or ending in this area and the land use? Okay. Then we use the relationships, the relationship which you develop in step 1 to estimate the number of trips for some future data or some new land use in the same area. If you have some happening in the future, what will happen to the number of trips? So first of all, find out the effect of land use on the trips, then use that relationship to find out what will happen in future. Okay, there are 3 methods of doing trip generation or conducting the process of trip generation: cross classification, rates based on activity units, and the regression analysis. Okay. In this topic, we only cover the first 2. Okay, regression analysis is not normally used for trip generation, and the reason is that it relies on aggregated data, not individual data. So regression analysis basically gives you total number of trips for the entire zone. Okay, but in cross classification and activity unit methods, we calculate trips using individual characteristics, individual households and individual travelers. Okay, so that's why we prefer the first 2 methods, and the third method we will not discuss it. But we have already covered regression earlier. Okay, we have covered in the previous 2 topics. Okay, so the method of cross classification is a technique which is developed by Federal Highway Administration. Yes. To find out the number of trips which begin or end at the home. Okay, how many trips are beginning or ending at the home? Okay, so home-based trips. Cross classification is basically used for finding out the number of home-based trips. Okay, and it's a useful representation because obviously for most of the trips, either your zone will have most of the trips either begin at the home or end at the home, right? If you are going to your work, your trip begins at home. Coming from work, your trip ends at home. Okay, or you're coming from another country, your trip ends at home. Okay, so this is basically most of the trips. Very rarely you would have a trip which is not beginning at home and ending at home, or ending at home. Okay, very rarely. Okay, so because we are social species, social animals, right? So we prefer to go home like other animals. Okay, so the first step in cross classification method is to find out the relationship between socioeconomic characteristics and trip production. Okay, what type of socioeconomic characteristics we normally use? Average income and ownership of the cars. So number of trips, home-based trips generated according to cross-classification methods mainly depends upon income and house and car ownership. And you can see the graph over here. Okay, and this graph is basically showing the relationship between income and number of households in the area with that income. Okay. So you have the low income households. Okay, they are very high. Okay, and then you have medium income, which are in the middle, and so on. Okay, we'll discuss it in one other slide as well when I show you the data. Okay, other variables that can include that can affect the number of trips can be household size and where did it go? Okay, let me do something here. Yeah. Okay. The other variables which may affect the number of trips is household size, number of people in the household, and stage in the household life cycle, meaning newly married couple, couple with a two-child, couple with the adult child. Okay, so household life cycle meaning what age group of people and living in the household and what is the relationship with each other. Okay, this is a stage in the household life cycle. Okay, so the relationships are based upon income data and the results of origin destination service. So for cross classification method, you need income data and you need OD surveys. Let us look at an example how these relationships are developed, how the relationship between socioeconomic characteristics and the number of trips are developed. Okay, now you can see here how, so they collected data from 20 households. Okay, this is not size of the household, this is the household serial number. Okay, 1 to 20. Okay, trips produced per household. So every household told them how many trips they have every day. Okay, the income of the household in thousands, $16,000 and so on, and how many cars they have in that household. Okay, so they have collected data from 20 households about these three things: auto ownership, income, and number of trips. The three things which I have mentioned earlier in the previous slide as the most important parameters. Now they're saying develop curves and relationships between each of these parameters, okay, and the number of trips. Let us see how. So I will show you the process step by step, and the calculation involved is not so difficult. Okay, so just try to understand the procedure. I'm trying to explain you the procedure. So we have data from 20 households, okay, and from each household we ask three things: income, number of trips, and car ownership. Okay, what process we follow to develop the relationship between income, car ownership, and number of trips is this. Okay, the step one is develop a matrix which will show the relationship between the number of households for each income group and each car ownership category. For each income group and each car ownership category, develop the relationship between them. Okay, or prepare a matrix between them. So you can see the matrix over here. they have divided the income into how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 categories. 5 categories. And the number of household, number of autos are divided into 3 categories. 0 autos, 0 automobiles, meaning 0 cars, 1 car, or 2 or more cars. Okay, so this is their own choice. This is their own choice. Okay, if you see the figure on the right hand side, the income is now only divided into 3 categories. Instead of 5, it is divided into 3 categories. So you can play with the ranges and you can play with the number of categories you want to have for each variable depending upon the data. Okay, so you see here more than 48,000, the data is very low. So they said, okay, why don't we merge this into one category? Okay, and then why don't we have a category at 32,000? Okay, and so on and so forth. So this is their own choice. Okay, but initially they made the income into 5 categories and number of cars into 3 categories, and for each category they have found from this table how many households belong to each category. Okay, so for example, how many households have income of 24,000 and have 0 cars? So 0 cars and income of 24,000. This one, let me mark it. Okay, this one, and do you see another one? There should be one more. Ah, 24 or less. So this one. Okay, 24 or less. So I think this should be 24 or less. Okay, so these two. Okay, so 2. And then how many have income between 24 and 36 and have 0 cars? Only 1 according to them. So 24 and 36, only this one. Okay, number of cars 0, right? So only this one. Okay, so in this way, first of all, you have to decide how many categories of income you want to have and how many categories of car ownership you want to have, and then you develop this matrix. Okay, the numbers which you see in the brackets are basically percentage of household in that income category percentage of that income category with the specific number of cars. Okay, so 67% of people who have less than 24,000 income do not have any car. Okay, 33% of people who are in this category have 1 car, and 0% people who are in this category have 2 cars. Okay, similarly 25% of people who are in this income category have 0 cars, and so on and so forth. Okay, then you can see so you can develop a matrix like this, or you can develop these curves. So what are these curves? So you can see for each auto ownership I have a curve. For each auto ownership I have a curve. Okay, so this is for 2 plus cars, and this for 1 car, and this is for 0 cars. Okay, so then on the x-axis you see the income categories. Okay, so percentage of people who have 0 cars and medium income, 4%. Okay, percentage of people who have 0 cars and low income, 54%, and percentage of people who have 0 cars and this is done high income, so they are almost 0%. Percentage of people who have high income and 0 cars are almost 0%. Okay, and similarly you have the curve for 2 and for 1 and so on and so forth. So they have already made 3 categories of income and 3 categories of car ownership, and then depending upon the data, they have plotted these 3 curves. So both these curves, sorry, this table and the matrix both are, this matrix and the figure is showing the same thing, the relationship between or the percentage of households for each car ownership and income category. The percentage of household for each car ownership and income category. Both these are showing the same thing. So you can use the table or the figure, doesn't matter. They are showing the same thing. Step 2 is, okay, one important point here, that you should collect the data that in such a manner that eventually you have 25 values in each cell of the matrix. So all these values 25 or more, not percentage, okay, value. I'm not talking about the percentage in the bracket. The value itself should be 25 or more practically. Okay, so if it is less than 25, then either you can merge the categories, so the combined will be 1. Okay, what they have done with, for example, income. So you can merge these 2 categories, maybe the combined value is 25 or more, or you collect some more data. Okay, but keep in mind the for this process, the minimum value is set as 25 for each cell. For each combination, you should have at least 25 values. Okay, then step 2 is average number of trips per household is connected with income and cars. Okay, average number of households, average number of trips per household for each category of income and car. Okay, so we are using the same matrix. Okay, so for these 2 households, what is the average number of trips? So you come to this table. For this one, it is 2. For this one, it is 4. So you take the average. Okay, and obviously, if you have just one value, then you take the number as it is, right? If you have just one value, you take the number as it is. For this household, the number is 4. So you take 4. Okay. When you have more than one value, you will take the average, and when you have one value, just take the value as it is. Okay, so same matrix which we have used earlier, and now instead of writing number of households, I'm writing number of trips. Okay, and as I said, it starts from here. From here, you see how many households I have. Go to that in the initial data and then find the number. Okay, if it is 1, just write the number as it is. If it is more than 1, calculate the average. Okay, so and then again you can show it in the form of this matrix, or you can show it in the form of this graph. So in the graph, again, x-axis income, y-axis number of trips per household, these values 3, 5, 6 and so on. And again you have one curve each for each category of car ownership. This is for 0, this is for 1, this is for 2 and more. Okay, and you have so now you can see when number of cars increase, the number of trips are also increasing. Okay, and similarly when income increases, the number of trips are also increasing. Okay, there is no such trend with this data set. Okay, some graphs are going obviously there's a trend for 0 car ownership. So if you have if you don't have any cars, but this is related to percentage of households in the area. Okay, so usually this trend is very obvious. If you increase the number of cars in the household, number of trips will increase. If your income is increasing, number of cars will increase, number of trips will increase. This is very obvious. Okay, this is what usually happens. But this graph is not fixed. The trend which you show in this graph, which you are looking at in this graph, is not something which you will look at every time. Okay, so in some areas this may go the other way around. Okay, 0 autos may be going like this and 2 autos may be going like this. Okay, it depends upon the type of area. Okay, what type of area you have. But in this case it is very obvious. Okay, and cells in which there were 0 household, there are no values. See here, this has 0 here. So no value. Okay. Yeah. In step 3, you collect additional origin destination data. Okay, so you take a sample of OD survey, origin destination survey, either through household, either through roadside, or any of the methods which we have discussed in the previous topic, and you find out the percentage of trips by trip purpose for each income category. And this is the graph which they have plotted using that data. That data is not shown here. That data is not shown here. But what they have done in each household for which they have collected the data, they went there and they asked them how many trips you are taking home based and how many trips you are taking non home based and how many trips are home based work and how many trips are home based other. So basically they are dividing trips into 3 categories according to their purpose. Home based work, meaning you are going from to your workplace, home based work. Home based other, meaning you are going from your home to any other place. Okay, and then we have non home based. Okay, so you came to this area, the trip, and this is not your home. Okay, non home based, you did not your trip did not start from your or this zone does not have your home here. Your home does not belong to this area. Okay, this is non home based trip. Okay, so again they found the number of trips which are home based, non home based work, home based other, and non home based for each income category. So for each person they were asking how many trips you make home based, how many trips you make home based other, and how many trips you make non home based, and what is your income. And then depending upon that they have plotted these curves. Okay, so again you see when income increases, non home based trips, all trips are increasing. Okay, and the percentage of trips is higher for home based other, and so on and so forth. Okay, this is again something related to the type of area. It's not fixed. So these are the 3 relationships which you can develop use collecting some data. Okay, so first relationship was the distribution of household depending upon income and car ownership. The second relationship was the relationship between number of trips and car ownership and household size. And third relationship is the number of trips on the basis of their purpose and income. Okay, 3 relationships. Now how to use them? Let us talk about that. So we have, let's say, a zone, a traffic analysis zone, in which we have 60 units, 60 housing units, dwelling units, housing units, and the average income of that zone is $44,000. Okay, we have to find out number of trips generated in this zone for each trip purpose. Trip purpose are again home based work, home based other, and non home based. Okay, so and we will use the curves, the relationships which we have already developed in the previous example. Okay, so this is a continuation of the same example. So the 20 households for which we collected the data were from this zone. Okay, so now we see how to use those relationships to calculate the number of trips. Okay, first of all, find out the percentage of households in each income category. Okay, and this can be collected from census data, the population data, the overall population data. So how many households have less than $32,000 income? 9%. How many have between 32 and 48? 40%. How many have more than 48? 51%. Okay, this is not collected from the user. This is the overall data of the population from the government sources. Okay, from the government sources. And then the distribution can be seen here as well in this graph. Okay, so you have the average income here. Okay, and the high income, this is the curve for high income, this is a curve for medium, and this is a curve for low income group. and this is the percentage of households with that income category. Okay, so household low income category, the number of households are decreasing as the income increases. For median income, as the income increases, it goes up and then comes down and so on and so forth. Okay, so 51%, and this is for medium income, and this is for, okay, so if you take the average of these three values, 51%, 40%, and 9%, okay, I mean multiply percentage with the relative income, you will get the average, again the average of the entire area, 44,000. Okay, we will not go in that detail. Okay, the important point is this one. This table is coming from the census, okay, the government data, and then you will find from the data how many houses you have for each income category and for each number of cars. Okay, now we have this table, okay, and we know in the entire area there are 60 what? There are 60 units total. So out of these 60 units, how many have low income with 0 cars, low income with 1 car, low income with 2 or more cars, and same thing for middle income, and same thing for a high income as well. How to find that? The total is 60. Okay, from 60, I know 40% are medium income. So 60 into 40, 60 total into 40%. This will give me the total number of households which have medium income. Okay, then multiply by 58.58. What is 0.58? Coming from the previous example, number of households that were medium income and had 1 car from those 20 households. The percentage, let me go back. So medium income and having one car. So this is the curve for 1 car, and medium income is here. Okay, so here, this point. Okay, so the curve was plotted for each car ownership category and each income level, and the point, the percentage of medium income households which have 1 car will come from the y-axis, so 58%. Okay, so from this data, from these 20 households, 58% households had 1 car and medium income. So 60 total number of households in the area, multiply by 40% the number of household which have medium income category from the government data, and 58% the number of medium income households which have 1 car from the sample data of 20. Okay, so this is done in this manner. Okay, similarly, for example, how did I get 54? How did I get 54? 60 again, total number of households. This is belonging to which income category? Low income. According to government data, low income should be 9%, so 0.09. This will be the total number of low income group. Out of the low income group, how many have 0 cars? This is coming from, again, the curve which I have already plotted. So this is low income is this one, right? And I'm talking about 0. So 0 curve and low income. Okay. This is the value, 54. So 0.54. Okay, so this will give you 54. Okay, so you come here and you, for each category, you take 60, the total number of households in the area, multiply by the income, total income category of that income. Okay, the total proportion of that income coming from the government data, and then you multiply with the relationship which you have already developed for the income category and number of cars. Okay, Then step 3 is find out number of household trips for each income and auto ownership category. Okay, and this has been done using the again from the previous example. Okay, so we have already, if I go back, or the table is the curve is already there, sorry. So for example, how did I find one here? The curve which I plotted for the previous data, low income is here. Low income is here, and I'm doing it for 0 cars. So from low income, I come to 0 cars, and this is the number of trips per household, 1. Okay, if I want for low income 1 car, then from low income I go to the curve of 1 car and I find out the number of trips, okay, which is 6. And then for low income 2 cars, I go up and I find out the, where is it, this one, right, this one. So this is 7. Okay, so now you are taking the values from the curve which you have already plotted. Okay, like I said, you can use these income categories as well. 5 instead of the curve, use these income categories, then you already know the number of trips, right? 3 and 4 and 5. Why I'm using the curve? Because they have combined some of the income categories, so I'm using the curve. Okay, if they didn't, we just use this matrix will go as it is. If you're using the same income category, the matrix will go as it is. Okay, so this is step number 3. Step number 4, it will take some time. So let us do it next time then, inshallah. Okay, I will try to explain the example again and we'll complete it next time. Okay, any questions, any queries, any problems? Okay, see you guys next time, inshallah then. Okay, thank you.
Is there anything about part 3 of the project?
Part 3, I can explain it once we cover the next, the lecture of the next week.
Okay.
Okay. After we finish this example, when we go to trip distribution and the next mode choice, then I can explain what we have to do. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, regarding the second submission, can I submit it by Excel or do I have to just put it in Word?
What you want to submit as Excel? I don't understand. You will
because
make some
because I'm
some
doing the
comparisons.
analysis. Yeah.
Right. So you need to write something as well. How would you write in Excel?
Okay.
You don't need to submit the full data because I gave the data, right? So I know the data. You just do the analysis, the tables and charts, the comparison, and you put that in the report. Okay, I don't need the data.
Yani doctor, for example, one student selected to do the responses on based on gender. He will compare with the rest of the questions.
Yeah, like for the questions, he will compare now. For example, how many responses he got for male and female, and then he will compare their average income of male and female, their choices in terms of autonomous vehicles, how many of the male said yes to autonomous vehicle, how many of the female said yes to autonomous vehicle. Okay, getting my point? But before that, do some combined analysis as well. Do some combined, calculate some combined things as well. Total average income, total number of responses, average ranking of the autonomous vehicle for everybody, and then you do the comparison. Okay.
The comparison between only the section we have selected and the autonomous vehicle. Okay.
Yes, focus on the selection of autonomous vehicles when you are doing the comparison. This is the main thing. Okay, and as I said, you submit to me. If there are any mistakes, I will tell you and you can correct in the final submission. I will not deduct any grades. All right, these are all formative submissions. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Doctor.
Okay, you're welcome. So see you guys next time, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.